What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? It's the Shield Brother here again for the History Armada. This week, we're having a rather obscure history video today. We're going to talk about a little known fact about the Young Islander Rebellion of 1848, which happened today, July 29th, 1848. Everyone knows there was many Irish rebellions throughout the years, and it was a very tumultuous time under British rule and lots of different efforts. Well, this one came 1848 in the height of the Irish Famine. So, the Young Islander Rebellion was a failed Irish nationalist uprising led by the Young Ireland movement, part of the wider revolutions of 1848 that affected most of Europe. It took place on the 29th of July, 1848, in the village of Ballingarry, South Tipperary. After being chased by a force of Young Irelanders and their supporters, an Irish constabulary unit took refuge in a house and held those inside as hostages. A several-hour gunfight followed, but the rebels fled after a large group of police reinforcements arrived. So let's talk about the causes. As with the earlier United Irishmen who sought to emulate the American Revolution, the Young Irelanders were inspired by republicanism in America and in Europe. Ireland was also still reeling from the impact of the Great Famine. The British government's reaction had been too little and too late to prevent the Irish people from suffering great hardship. This delayed and caused a lot of backlash and tribulation. It is sometimes called the Famine Rebellion, since it took place during the Great Irish Famine, or the Battle of Ballingarry, and its reaction was criticized by Irish officials to little avail. This, we can see, was another result of the Irish Famine. The Irish Famine, the Potato Famine as it's sometimes called, is what caused the mass Irish immigration to the Americas and to the European continent due to, just unsustainable living conditions. And it's possible that this Irish Famine was also a form of genocide due to the implications and the restrictions and taxations and so on by the British government onto the Irish island, and its effects and just what it caused for the people, the massive amounts of death, immigration, so on. And this rebellion was just one factor of this Irish famine and time of trouble. So 1848 was the year of revolutions throughout continental Europe. In February 1848, King Louis Philippe of France was overthrown and the Second Republic was proclaimed in Paris. This revolution sent political shockwaves across Europe, and revolutions broke out in Berlin, Vienna, Rome, Prague, and Budapest. At least temporarily, absolutist governments were replaced by liberal administrations, suffrage was introduced for a portion of the population, and elections were held to constitute assemblies to draw up new national constitutions. It was sometimes described as the springtime of the people. So, this Young Islander Revolution also takes place during, the time of revolutions, the 1848 time of great change and liberal ideas, ideals, and uprisings within Europe. So let's talk about the origins of this Young Islander Revolution. Inspired by these events and success of liberal romantic nationalism on the European mainland, and disgusted by Daniel O'Connell's acceptance of patronage from the British liberals, a group known as Young Ireland broke away from O'Connell's Repeal Association. They took an uncompromising stand for a national parliament with full legislative and executive powers within Ireland. As its founding, the Confederation resolved to be based on principles of freedom, tolerance, and truth. While the young men did not call for rebellion, neither would they make absolute pledges for peace. Their goal was independence of an Irish nation, and they held to any means to achieve that which were consistent with honor, morality, and reason. The Young Irelanders, as they had become known, longed to see achieved in Ireland the liberties achieved on the continent. At the beginning of 1847, they formed an organization known as the Irish Confederation. The leaders were William Smith O'Brien, Thomas Francis Meagher, Richard O'Gorman led a delegation to Paris to, congratulate the new French Republic and to communicate with them and establish connections. Meagher returned to Ireland with a tricolour flag, now the national flag, a symbol of reconciliation of the green of Catholic Gaelic Ireland with the orange of Protestant Anglo-Ireland. Since most of the continental revolutions were relatively bloodless, O'Brien believed he could attain similar results in Ireland. He hoped to unite Irish landlords and tenants in protest against British rule. The government, however, forced the leader's hands on the 22nd of July 1848. By announcing the suspension of habeas corpus. This meant they could imprison the young Irelanders and other opponents on proclamation without trial. Having to choose between armed resistance or an ignominious fight, O'Brien decided that the movement would have to take a stand, leading to rebellion. From July 23rd to July 29th of 1848, O'Brien, Meagher, and Dillon raised the standard of revolt as they travelled from County Wexford through County Kilkenny into County Tipperary. The last gathering of Young Ireland leaders took place in the village of the Commons on July 28th. The next day, O'Brien was in the Commons where barricades had been erected near the Commons colliery to prevent his arrest. His local supporters, miners, tradesmen, and small tenant farmers awaited the arrival of the military and the police, armed. As the police from Callan approached the crossroads before the Commons from Ballingarry, they saw barricades in front of them, and thinking discretion the better part of valor, they veered right up the road towards County Kilkenny. The rebels followed them across the fields. Sub-Inspector Trant and his 46 policemen took refuge in a large two-story farmhouse, taking the 5 children in the house as hostages. They barricaded themselves in, pointing their guns from the window. The house was surrounded by the rebels, and a standoff ensued. Mrs. Margaret McCormick, the owner of the house and the mother of the children, demanded to be let into the house, but the police refused and would not release her young children. Mrs. McCormick found O'Brien he found O'Brien talking to the house from the outbuildings and asked him what was to become of her children and her house. O'Brien and Mrs. McCormick went up to the parlor window of the house to speak to the police. Through the window, O'Brien stated, "We are all Irishmen. Give up your guns and you are free to go." O'Brien shook his hands with some of the police through the window. The initial report to the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland stated that a constable fired the first shot at O'Brien, who was attempting to negotiate. General firing then ensued between the police and the rebels. O'Brien had to be dragged out of the line of fire by James Stephens and Terence Bellew McManus, both of whom were later injured. The rebels were incensed that they had been fired upon without without reason, and the shooting went up on a number of hours. During the initial exchange of fire, the rebels at the front of the house, men, women, and children, crouched beneath the wall. So great was the pressure from the crowd that one man, Thomas Walsh, was forced to cross from one side of the front gate to the other. As he crossed between the gate piers, he was shot dead by the police. During lulls in the shooting, the rebels retreated out of the range of fire. Another man, Patrick McBride, who had been standing at the gable end of the house when the firing began, was quite safe where he was, found that his companions had retreated. Jumping up on the wall to run and join them, he was fatally wounded by the police. It was evident to the rebels that the position of the police was almost impregnable, and a Catholic clergyman of the parish, Reverend Philip Fitzgerald, endeavored to mediate in the interest of peace and the people. When a party of the Coastal Police under Sub-Inspector Cox were seen arriving over the Bola Hill, the rebels attempting to stop them, even though they were low on ammunition, but the police continued to advance, firing up the road. It became clear that the police in the house were about to be reinforced and rescued. The rebels then faded away, effectively terminating both the era of Young Ireland and repeal, but the consequences of their actions would follow them for many years. This event is likely known as the Battle of Widow McCormick's Cabbage Plot, because they were in her cabbage plot of Widow McCormick's house. Here on the top right, you can see Widow McCormick's house near Ballingarry, and down the bottom left, you can see removal of Smith O'Brien to a prison under the sentence of death due to treason. So the aftermath. John Mitchell, the most committed advocate of revolution, had been arrested early in 1848. Then, convicted on the purposely created charge of treason and felony. He was sentenced to transportation to Bermuda, where he joined other convicts laboring on the construction of the Royal Navy dockyard on Ireland Island. He was subsequently sent to Van Diemen's Island in present-day Tasmania, Australia, where he was soon to be joined by other leaders such as William Smith O'Brien and Thomas Francis Meagher, who had been both arrested after Ballingarry. John Blake Dillon escaped to France, as did three of the younger members, James Stephens, John O'Mahony, and Michael Doheny. Meagher and John Mitchell, who had been transported there before for political activities, both managed to escape and immigrate to the United States in the early 1850s. They served on opposite sides of the American Civil War, Meagher serving with the Union, for which he recruited for and commanded the Irish Brigade, and Mitchell allying himself with the South and living there, sending three sons to fight with the Confederacy. The McCormick family immigrated to the U.S. about 1853 after these events. Since that time, the McCormick House, which was owned by numerous other families after 1848, has always been known locally as the War House. In 2004, the state decided on Famine War House 1848 as the official name of the house, which had been designated as a National Heritage Monument. So, the leaders were all forced to flee or imprisoned, and the rebellion subsequently ended. But in America, the Fenian Brotherhood, or the Irish Republican Brotherhood, after the collapse of the rebellion, James Stephens and John O'Mahony went to the continent to avoid arrest. In Paris, they supported themselves by teaching and with translation work, and planned the next stage of the fight to overthrow British rule in Ireland. In 1856, O'Mahony went to America and founded the Fenian Brotherhood in 1858. Stephens returned to Ireland, and in Dublin on St. Patrick's Day 1858, following an organization tour through the length and breadth of the country, founded the Irish counterpart of the American Fenians, the Irish Republican Brotherhood. So two leaders would go on to make political parties and brotherhood in search of extinguishing the British control over the national Ireland. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Young Ireland. I apologize for getting wrong any of those Irish last names. So here we can see one of the more obscure Irish uprisings in search of an Irish freedom and an Irish nationality, in search of extinguishing the British rule. It was a short-lived one, but kind of an interesting one, about how the famine yet again caused an uprising and strife for the Irish people due to the British government. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a little bit, and as always, I'll catch y'all next time.